Hi, everyone. Kinsey Schofield here, and I hope you are having the most fun, festive holiday season. As we wrap up 2025, we are looking back at some of my favorite interviews, some of my favorite guests, and I know that you love and enjoy them too. So kick back, relax, and enjoy your Christmas holiday, your Hanukkah, all the things. And I appreciate you, and I look forward to seeing you again in 2026. Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. This week, I'm excited to welcome Sally Bedell-Smith, the best-selling author of Elizabeth the Queen, The Life of a Modern Monarch, and the voice behind Royals Extra on Substack. Together, we are remembering Queen Elizabeth, which you've actually written several books about Queen Elizabeth. So if somebody is curious, there is an entire library out there. I just wanted to focus on this one book just so that I had a little bit of rhythm. I hope you don't mind.
Yeah, she shows up.
Yeah.
She shows up in the Diana book. She shows up in the King Charles book. She shows up in the George VI and Elizabeth, her mother and father. So she's a constant presence.
She is, and she deserves to be. Before we begin, the headlines are once again dominated by the clash between Prince Harry and the royal family. He's in the UK right now. I wanted to ask you about Prince Harry trying to force this half in, half out royal lifestyle with the latest visit to the UK. Um, which honestly, if I hope you don't mind me saying this, but you brought this to my attention. I sat back and viewed it all as a PR exercise. I want you to love me the way you used to love me. I'm going to remind you of why you fell in love with me. But when you look at what he's doing, it's in direct conflict with what Queen Elizabeth said around the Megxit agreement. You can't be half in, half out.
Yeah.
And so thank you for bringing that to my attention.
Well, absolutely. I think if the Queen were alive, she would be profoundly irritated, if not angry, that Harry is indeed this week violating the spirit, if not the actual technicalities of the agreement. Um, the Queen was adamant that you are either in the royal family doing royal duties, committed to service, or you're out and pursuing your commercial life. But you can't be out there pursuing, having TV series and writing explosive books and then come back in when you feel like it, just when it suits you to do a few royal style, people have called them pseudo royal events. When you feel like it. And she said, you're in or you're out. And if you're out, we wish you very well. We hope you have a happy life, but you no longer carry the HRH. You still have your Sussex title. You are still Prince Harry. Your children, well, she didn't say it because it didn't happen until after she died, but their children are Prince Archie and Princess Lilibet. Um, so they have those little perks, but she was very firm that they had, they had to be one or the other. And I was looking through my notes actually from January of 2020, and a friend of mine was telling me about someone who was there because they were just having their normal life at Sandringham. They were having shooting weekends, and all their friends were coming to visit. And then suddenly this crisis emerged where they had to have the Sandringham Summit. And there was somebody there who was a big businessman. And the Queen said, we're going to have a conference call with Canada, with Meghan in Canada. And what should I do about that? And he said, don't do it. You can control the people who are in your room, but you have no idea who is in the room with Meghan. And that's the reason that Meghan was not in on the discussions, which she, greatly resented.
That is so fascinating because I remember that exact moment in the Netflix docuseries where she's looking at the camera talking about how angry she was that decisions were being made about her while excluding her. And there's just a little bit of it. I mean, I understand that she's married into this family and this is her husband, but there's a little entitlement there. You know, this is a very important institution. It's about
Yeah.
than you. So the fact that she wanted to go and complain on international television on Netflix about being excluded, I always thought, I'm glad, thank you for sharing that with me because I always thought that was so clever of the family not to allow,
Yeah.
because she could have secretly recorded it, which we've seen them do.
Yeah. It indicated that mistrust had already begun.
Oh,
I mean, the Queen, didn't even realize what the implications were. And it took somebody who was savvy to say, no, no, don't do that. You could be putting yourself in jeopardy.
thank goodness she listened to that advice. I have kind of described this as like what appears to be a redemption tour where Prince Harry does want us to see him as the old royal. But his team has been teasing a commercial venture that belongs to him that we're supposed to hear about in the near future. So is it fair for him to try to, I mean, if you think about the fact that there's a commercial venture on the way, it really does feel like he's trying to bulldoze the royal family into allowing this half in, half out, or at the very least, try to bamboozle the media so that they will continue to treat him in a royal fashion.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the other things that when I was getting ready for this was in October of 2018 when the Fab Four was breaking up. People didn't know it yet, but I was hearing about it at the beginning of October. They were going to Australia for their big tour, and somebody on their staff actually found Meghan designing a logo for their new foundation that she had already named. This was in October of 2018. And about a week later, the Sunday Times broke the story that the Royal Foundation was going to be split in half in 2019. But you do get a sense when you know that Meghan was she was engineering this very early on. This was, a year and a half before Megxit. And so it just is a little window into the way she was calculating things, even back then.
Your thoughts on the out, you have Hollywood connections. You have, I think you're a very worldly woman. What is your thought on What is your thought on the outcome of With Love, Megan? We've seen season two not take off as much as season one. And the reality is, season one was likely morbid curiosity mixed with influencers looking for ways that they could parody it. Do you think that Netflix is happy with the product they delivered? Because we initially heard they were just so happy with the Harry and Meghan documentary that Harry and Meghan could create a couple of duds and they would
Yeah,
tolerate it. But I don't know if you can
I
tolerate this
I
anymore.
mean, I haven't looked at any of the statistics, but I mean, based on some of the early returns, it sounded as if people were just losing interest. I mean, look, we're now what, a week out, and nobody's really even talking about it anymore. I mean, I had to grit my teeth and watch the whole thing, but it wasn't even a second series. It was, as quite a few people have called it, part B because it was all filmed together. And I mean, I thought it was even less interesting than the original one, and it didn't make top 10 lists anywhere, whereas the first one did. And so I think, I cannot see a future for it. I mean, it's not really aspirational. Um, I was at one point completely bewildered by the wildly expensive kitchen equipment she was using and thinking, how could anybody use this?
Right.
I mean, how can anybody relate to this? And the recipes I thought were either, kind of pointless or just difficult. We want people like Ina Garten who will tell us how to make really wonderful meals that are simple.
Yeah.
But Meghan isn't that. I mean, the other thing that kept striking me when I was watching it is she kept saying, I don't know, I didn't want to count because I lost count, but I'm doing this for the first time.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, wait a minute, you're doing a cooking show and you're doing something for the first time. I mean, people like Julia Child would test recipes over and over and over again to make sure they were going to be um, good.
Right.
I just thought that was, well, the much used word inauthentic.
Mhm.
Um, I just couldn't quite believe that that was the case, that this was something she was doing for the first time.
Yeah. I mean, or market the show. Well, first of all, yes, to your point, was she really doing this for the first time? And if not, like if she really was doing it for the first time, market the show as a duchess doing something for the first time, even though I hate
Yeah.
that. I hate that she's a duchess. But we're supposed to believe that she's this expert that's teaching us how to live, how to pursue joy. And it's like,
Yeah.
well, if you're not an expert, if this is the first time you're stumbling
I
on
know there's some basic contradictions, I think.
exactly. Everybody's going to be talking about this over the next week or so. Do you know what we should look forward to? Do you think there's anything special for President Trump's upcoming state visit? It's a tense time in the world, and
Yeah,
we know that
very.
he's a fan of the royal family. So I feel like he's going
Is he ever?
to.
Well, I mean, I think they're going to pull out all the stops from the king and the queen and the prince and princess of Wales on down. They will all be there. Um, you have to remember that Charles has known Donald Trump for a long time. He first met him in 1985 when he and Diana were in the United States for that very famous tour where she danced with John Travolta in the White House. After that, they went to Florida for a big fundraising ball and they met the Trumps, then Ivana, and then 3 years later, Prince Charles went to Palm Beach for a charity polo event. And guess what his very first stop was?
Oh,
Mar-a-Lago.
how interesting.
Charles arrived at Mar-a-Lago in 1988 with a motorcade and, police and outriders and everything. And he went to Mar-a-Lago and he had tea with Donald and Ivana, and they had various house guests like Estee Lauder and Betsy Bloomingdale. So Charles knew him in this. Excuse me. Speaking of motorcades, there's one going by my house right now. It's probably the vice president who lives up the street.
Oh,
Um,
I love this. I love this. A little behind the scenes.
in other words, he goes way back. I think whatever Charles may think of Trump's policies and his politics, what he knows above all is that Donald J. Trump adores the royal family. Donald Trump's mother was born in Scotland. You can't say that over and over, enough. He said the Queen reminded him of his mother. And, and so I think Charles is savvy enough that he knows what he needs to say to him, how he needs to stroke him, or what buttons he needs to push. And I think they'll do everything they can to make him feel welcome and to reinforce the evident love that he has for the royal family.
Yes, I remember him saying in an interview within the last few years that he had a hard time forgiving Prince Harry because of the way that Harry treated Queen Elizabeth.
Yes.
And so we know that Queen Elizabeth was important to him. She's important to us. Uh, if I've learned anything from your books, it's that so much of what we love about Princess Elizabeth at the time, then she becomes Queen Elizabeth, was from what she inherited from her parents. Take us back, Bertie and Elizabeth's love story. It almost doesn't happen. She turned him down not once, but twice before finally agreeing to marry him. In 1923, they tied the knot, and thankfully, they were in love with each other. They had this incredible devotion and trust, which proved invaluable when life threw them this curveball in 1960 or 1936. You
Right.
call it the marriage that saved the monarchy.
Well, it was because his older brother, King Edward VIII, was a truly terrible monarch. He was irresponsible. He drank too much. He partied too much. He didn't pay attention to his government documents. He was only king for 326 days. And the Foreign Office mistrusted him so much that they withheld documents from him. Um, and during this period, he threw the royal family into turmoil with this love affair with Wallis Simpson, who was a non starter. She had been divorced from two men who were still living. And that just he was never going to be able to be the king and make her his queen.
I also think we always talk about Wallis Simpson as a divorced woman, but she was also married when she starts this affair, which is also like, oh no, you can't do that.
Yeah, yeah, no, she was, and he didn't care, and all he was thinking about was himself. Um, and it was really fortunate that he abdicated to marry her because he was a Nazi sympathizer. He, had meetings with the German ambassador and signaled that he was in favor of Adolf Hitler. So I think probably even if Wallace hadn't come along, he would have done something that would have violated government policy, and he would have had to step down. But it took Bertie and Elizabeth had to come in and pick up the wreckage, and not only did they do that, but they proved themselves to be admirable diplomats. They went to France in 1938, and they went to um, the United States and Canada in the summer of 1939, when it was actually kind of dangerous to cross the Atlantic. And they were just a triumph. And the relationship between the king and Franklin D. Roosevelt was established, and they set up some policies that would be carried forward once the war began, which everybody knew it would. Um, and and the most important thing, I think, was that they really understood the British people, and the British people really understood that Bertie and Elizabeth were dutiful and brave, particularly during World War II. Um, they were out and around, driving around London when the when the bombs were falling, and they were taking shelter in police stations. And it's really amazing. But Buckingham Palace was bombed 9 times during World War II, and they weren't living there. They were actually living in Windsor, but they were going into when they weren't traveling around the country. They were in Buckingham Palace every day. And on Friday, the 13th of September in 1940, as the Blitz was beginning, a bomb fell on Buckingham Palace and nearly killed them. I
Okay.
mean, they came very, very close to being killed, but they were undeterred. They traveled all over by train, and Elizabeth had a wonderful armored car that she called the Brontosaurus. and But you know, they never complained. They just did their duty, and um, they went out into the poorest neighborhoods of London and really everywhere, and spent so much time consoling people. And I mean, there was a moment after Buckingham Palace was bombed when she said, I can now look the East End in the face because they were, they, nobody was immune and they were being bombed as relentlessly as the poor neighborhoods on the south side of the Thames.
Wow. Well, do you think that the age that all of this happens for Queen Elizabeth, which she discovers she's going to be queen one day at age 10, do you think that that age, and then when World War II happens and seeing her father and mother's selflessness and bravery, is it nice that it happens at this age? Because I mean, Princess Catherine would probably be one of the best ones to discuss this with because of her early years project.
Yeah.
But I wonder how much of her age had to do with how much she digested and recognized that, wow, these are important traits in my family and I want to inherit them.
Yeah, I mean, I think she said very famously, when she'd been on the throne for 40 years, she said, I have a feeling in the end that training is the answer to a great many things. And you can do a lot if you're properly trained. And I hope I have been. And she was by her mother, by her father, by her grandmother, who, when Lilibet, as by the way, I'll just as a parenthetical, Lilibet called herself Lilibet before she was 2 years old. It was a name that only people in the family could use, not even her friends. And I can only imagine how upset she was when Meghan and Harry decided to call their daughter Lilibet.
So
Anyway,
annoying.
getting back to little Lilibet, at age 4, her grandmother, Queen Mary, had her there at a party for the wives of Indian princes, and when she was 12, and there was a meeting of the Polish foreign minister several months before the outbreak of the Second World War, there was little 12-year-old Lilibet at this table of all these adults who were trying to figure out how the British Poland Pact was going to be put into place. So, in other words, she was exposed to so much. She had it, she watched her mother and father carry out their duties. Her father showed her what it took to be a monarch. Her mother inculcated in her the values of loyalty and duty and steadfastness, all of which were and humility, all of which were very much a part of her character. And so she really was well trained. She was trained in constitutional theory by Henry Martin down at Eton,
Wow.
and the experience of living in Windsor Castle. She escaped from time to time, and they went up to Balmoral and they went out to Sandringham. But most of the time, they were living in Windsor, and they had to go into those bomb shelters, and they had to listen to what her mother said was the whistle and scream of bombs, even though Windsor never got hit. But it was a constant in her life. On the other hand, one of her governesses said there was never an atmosphere of gloom and doom. They
Mm.
weren't walking around feeling sorry for themselves. They could only fill their bathtubs of about this far because there was a black line. They had, blackout shades. They didn't have very good food, and they just went along with it, and that really, really shaped her.
Oh, I mean, that tells me so much when I think about how different King Charles's upbringing was.
Yeah,
She really struggled, and I love to hear that she never felt like she did, that she just was going with the flow. You write about how at age 14 she gives her first public address during the BBC's Children's Hour, offering
yeah.
encouragement to children evacuated during the war. How much does that remind you of the Queen we saw sit down in front of the cameras during COVID and just have that calm, that peacefulness?
Yeah,
It's like a warm blanket. Being
yeah,
wrapped in a warm blanket. She's telling
yeah,
you know we just we're going to come together, just be patient. Everything's going to be okay almost.
Yes. And by the way, which is typical, she practiced very diligently. She practiced her breathing, she practiced her phrases, she even added a few phrases of her own, and her parents listened to her. And then she had Margaret sitting next to her, and she spoke for 3 minutes. And in a letter to his mother, King George VI, afterwards said she was not at all nervous and she didn't mind doing it a bit.
Oh,
Um, there she was, a 14-year-old. Um, she was thrown into those kinds of situations at such an early age, and she just did what she was expected to do, and with it utterly uncomplaining.
oh, she's precious. I've always loved the idea of her becoming the first female member of the royal family to serve in the armed forces,
Yeah.
training as a driver and mechanic. Do you know how this came about? And do you think that she'll be the first and the last?
I don't know. Well, certainly, as a monarch, he's the first and last.
Yeah.
But I mean, the first moment was when she turned 16 on April 21st, 1942. And her father made her a colonel of the Grenadier Guards, who were actually there in Windsor. They were the primary um, regiment that was guarding them. And so she was always having them to lunch and to tea. And but then she became their colonel, and she did the inspection in the little quadrangle up at Windsor Castle. And she was very exacting and very meticulous. She noticed everything. And this was a characteristic of the way she was for her entire reign. Whenever she did an inspection, she noticed if anything was out of place. And she took her military command, as the head of the armed forces. She took it very seriously, and she loved all the regiments where she served as colonel. And, that was just a very important piece of who she was and how she carried out her role.
That reminds me of your Substack article where you discussed her disappointment in Harry for being so willing to just let go of
Yeah.
abandon those responsibilities.
Yeah.
Lady Elizabeth Anson had shared with you that the Queen, it just had a hard time comprehending how he could just abandon
Yeah.
such important responsibilities.
Yeah, because they were important. And you mentioned the other thing she did in World War II, which was in the spring of 1945 when she joined the Auxiliary Territorial Service. But in that time, she learned how to drive a 3-ton truck, and she was just second subaltern Elizabeth Alexandra Mary Windsor. And she wore the same uniform as all the other girls. And she had to salute to her senior officers. But she learned, there was a scene in the movie The Queen where the Range Rover got stuck, and she knew exactly what was wrong with it. And, she really did know things like that. She knew how to bleed brakes, and she knew how to change tires. She learned all that. And she said later, to a labor politician, she said, that was the only time in my life when I was ever able to measure myself against my contemporaries. And she loved, she got her face got grimy, her hands got grimy. But she said to another friend, she said, I never worked so hard in my life. And everything I learned was brand new to me. So it was very, very important for her to do something like that. I mean, one of the things that I discovered about her father is that he was a real man of the people. He was very comfortable with people from all walks of life, and they really appreciated that.
Um, I'm just curious to know if Prince Harry knows how to change a flat tire based on what you just said. I'd love to know if Prince Harry does.
Ah,
Like,
I wonder. He
Needle
probably always had somebody to change one for him. I
it.
remember this has nothing to do with that, but it's kind of funny, which is a wonderful man named John Julius Norwich, who knew the royal family really well. Once said, I said, how is she so calm all the time? How is the queen so calm? He said she never had to look for a parking place.
Oh, that's hilarious. That's a very good point. I would probably be a very peaceful person too.
Right.
1947, Queen Elizabeth marries Philip Mountbatten, formerly Prince Philip of Greece and Denmark. This happened November 20th at Westminster Abbey. But I love the fact that she was like, had a crush on him since she was 13 years old. I want to believe
Yeah.
this is a love story. You know that there are a million historians out there that are sometimes cynical about it. Where do you land on this? I want to believe.
I land on it was definitely a love story.
Okay.
She was 13 and they went to visit the Royal Naval College at Dartmouth. And he was a cadet and he was in training. And I guess they had glancingly met before, but he was, as anybody who's seen the pictures, I mean, he was an absolute Adonis. He was 18 years old, so 5 years older than she. But Margaret Rhodes, who was one of her Bowes-Lyon cousins, and I got to know her pretty well. And she said, she never looked at anybody else. And the Queen Mother, then Queen Elizabeth, kept bringing these very prestigious aristocratic men who were in various guards units around to see if she could fix them up with her, and she would have none of it. She just only had eyes for him. And during the war, he was serving in the Royal Navy in the Mediterranean and later in the Pacific, and he would come to Windsor for visits, and they corresponded. And at the end of the war in 1946, he was back in London, and he was sort of a constant presence at Buckingham Palace. And they were by then very much in love, and he proposed to her at Balmoral in the summer of 1946, and she accepted immediately. She didn't even ask her father, but he said, "Well, just keep it secret." And after you turn 21 in April of 1947, we can announce it.
Oh, wow.
And so they were married the following November, and it was at a very, very bleak time. It was a real bright spot for the British royal family.
I love that you said that it's truly a love story. I wonder if, because, even as Americans, we are guilty of watching The Crown and eating it up. And even in The Crown, there are a few moments that make you go, huh. But I don't think that The Crown is as accurate as we wish it was.
No, definitely not in many ways.
Exactly.
Um,
You said that Richard Crossman, this is a politician, once told you that the queen is deeply moved and tries to control her face, she looks like an angry thundercloud. Um,
yeah,
this kind of is related to something you say in a timepiece in 2012 when you talked about the Queen's grandmother. Um, Telling her about the way that she should pose, the way that she should smile. How,
sit. She couldn't sit with her back against the chair. Well, that was her mother actually who taught her that.
so she lives her entire life following these rules, doesn't she? That
Yeah.
she listens to this guidance and she's dedicated to these rules her entire life.
Yes. And I think part of it was she didn't want to show partiality. I think she was afraid that she would offend somebody. I mean, I was sort of riveted watching her, it's at royal engagements and how she could hold that impassive look for so long. I mean, once she even called it her Miss Piggy face. I mean, she knew that her that her resting face was a little grumpy. But that was okay because when she did smile, it was so radiant. And after the deaths of her mother and her sister in 2002, everybody noticed that she was smiling so much more. And
Mm.
she really had a beautiful smile. And and so I think that that restraint sort of loosened a bit. I mean, she was, by definition, a much more unintroverted, but she was a, she was a restrained person. I have in my mind's eye this moment when she was in the United States in Washington for a state visit for Bush 41, and they took her out to a housing project where they were building houses for low income people. And she went into one and she met the woman who had no idea what protocol was about. She stuck her hand out. She said, "Hey, how you doing?" And then she gave her an enormous hug. And you could see the queen was just sort of rigid with her hands by her side because she was not naturally a hugger when it came to strangers
Right.
until she was released. Now, Charles is a big hugger.
Yeah.
Camilla's a big hugger. William's a big hugger. They're all huggers now.
Yeah.
Um, but the queen was not.
I'm glad you said that because Meghan also says that they're not huggers. Well, let's talk, if you don't mind. I wanted to ask you, what can you tell me about the Queen as a mother? Because we're seeing a lot of, at least over the last few weeks, and I disagree with it, but criticism towards Catherine and Prince William that they're not doing enough. Their children are on break. Allow them to be with their
Yeah.
kids. We really have seen Prince William and Catherine prioritize their children. And I almost think it's unfair because what they're doing is a lot of them are comparing Prince William to Queen Elizabeth. And Queen
Mm-hmm.
Elizabeth was the monarch. She had a completely
Yeah.
different set of
Yeah.
responsibilities.
I mean, I think there's several things at work there. I think one is that he had such a disruptive childhood with all the fighting that went on between his mother and father, and he wants a normal childhood for his children,
Mhm.
and that's particularly important with George, who is going to be a future king. Um, but also, we have to remember that the queen was 25 when she became monarch. Her son was 3, her daughter was 1. And she felt she had an obligation to show that she was a worthy monarch. And so she was torn between the motherhood and fulfilling her duties in a way. And remember, she was surrounded by the gray men, all these courtiers who were judging her. So it's not surprising that she spent a lot of time away from her family. I mean, Philip was nominally the head of the family, but again, she was not a demonstrative person. She had wonderful nannies. She had her own mother who was very affectionate, particularly to Charles.
Mm.
But as her cousin Margaret Rhodes said to me, the family is not set up to be cozy. And but that being said, when they went off to Balmoral or Sandringham, she rode, she taught them how to ride, she played games with them. I mean, at one point when the Queen was being criticized, Princess Anne said that it just beggars belief that she didn't care about them. Of course, she cared about them, but she also wanted them to be resourceful and to learn from mistakes. And, maybe she went overboard with Prince Andrew in indulging him a little bit. But, that was she. And they also had this kind of tendency that it was said of the Queen Mother in particular of ostriching. She if she saw some issues that she didn't want to have to deal with, she kind of averted her eyes.
Oh, well, I can relate to that.
Yeah,
That's why I have dogs with absolutely no discipline. Okay. And you know what? They're perfect. Um,
yeah,
they're
of
asleep next.
course.
So can you tell me about the Queen's relationship with Camilla? Because I feel like there are differing reports there, but towards the end of her life, she was so gracious to tell the world,
Yes.
you can call her queen consort.
Yeah. And eventually queen, which
Yeah.
is what she was going to be all along. Well, when Charles had his first go round with Camilla, which, of which there were several, that was in 1972, and the Queen didn't know anything about that. It was only in the late 70s when Camilla and Andrew Parker Bowles's marriage started to fall apart because he was so wildly unfaithful. So she sort of gave up on him. And Charles had fallen in love with her in 1972. And although he wasn't ready to get married, he was crazy about her. And they got back together in like 1977, 78. And at that point, it was interesting. At that point, Andrew Parker Bowles was was an officer in the Blues and Royals Regiment, and some of the officers came to the Queen's advisors and said, "We're not very happy that the wife of one of our officers is sleeping with the son of the monarch." And at that point, um, the Queen banished Camilla from all royal events. And the Queen Mother did the same thing. And so that's the way it was for quite a while. And then after the marriage with Diana broke down and Charles and Camilla resumed again, they did it very much under the radar. It really wasn't until after the death of Diana in 1997, it wasn't until June of 2000 when Charles finally persuaded his mother to meet Camilla at a barbecue that he had at Highgrove. And as one of his advisors said, it wasn't really a breaking of the ice, it was a cracking of the ice.
Wow.
And from that moment on, Camilla was very gradually integrated into the family. You could see where she was seated for the Golden Jubilee in 2002, and then there were further family events where she appeared. But by the time they got married, and on April 9th, 2005, the Queen fully embraced her. The speech that she gave at the wedding reception was very warm and very funny because it had to do with the Grand National that was being run that day. And she said, "My son is home and dry with the woman he loves,"
Oh.
which was a sort of typical Queen way of saying it. And what she understood by then was that they were very well suited and that Camilla made him happy. And they were compatible, they were comfortable with each other. And she could look at the two of them and see that they had a very solid relationship. And that reassured her about the future of the monarchy.
Um, was it almost a blessing because I don't know if Camilla would have ever been allowed to marry King Charles having been divorced. I don't know. Was it almost a
Well, he
blessing?
was divorced by that time
Well,
too.
well, I
So,
mean, well, what
yeah.
I was going to say is, was it almost a blessing that Queen Elizabeth saw how toxic the relationship was with Diana, how manic Diana could be? Was it almost a blessing that she had seen that because then her
Yes.
eyes were open to see how good Camilla was for King Charles. Wow, this
Yeah.
is a completely different relationship. This is a woman that can support you. She doesn't want attention of her own, and she's mature and she's going to elevate you.
Age appropriate, I
Oh
think
yeah,
it's called.
true.
I mean, there was 12 years between Charles and Diana, and that was, a chasm. And not only that, but they didn't have anything in common,
Right,
really.
right.
But what was always so interesting to me is, again, this is this tendency that they have to kind of avert their eyes. Um, Diana was exhibiting some fairly alarming behavior early on, they thought it was pre-wedding jitters, post-wedding jitters, but it was far deeper than that. And but the Queen just couldn't come to grips with the fact that there was something fundamentally wrong with the marriage. And it really wasn't until the Andrew Morton book in 1992, when she realized that, not only did Diana say a lot of terrible things about the monarchy and about Charles, but that she had actively cooperated with it, that she had lied to everybody about it. And so they completely lost trust in her. And even then, they thought, well, maybe they can rub along and still be separated. But obviously, when she did the panorama interview, that was the end.
Yeah.
Um, but I think several people said, look, the Queen was kind to her. She didn't kind of understand her. But she, when Diana did damage to the monarchy, she realized that it just couldn't go on. And it was at that point that because for a long time, Charles just didn't confide in his mother and father. His friends knew what was going on, but you know, the Queen and Prince Philip really didn't until then,
Ooh,
in 1992. That was a long time.
that is a long time to hold that in and have to deal with.
Yeah,
Um, I want to ask you, this feels like a silly question. I say I have
there's
written,
nothing. There's no such thing.
well, thank you. So I have written, if you were to write a book about the Queen all over again from scratch, how important is Meghan Markle in the Queen's history? And I feel like if you asked me this, I'd be like, not at all. But the reality is, if you read your Substack and you read Royals Extra, Meghan Markle and Prince Harry, they really disrupted the Queen's final years. And so while I want to say she's not very important at all, I don't even know if I'd include Meghan Markle. I mean, I feel like so my question to you is, how important would Meghan Markle be to your book about the Queen? Because those last few years were so destructive, and it
Um,
breaks my heart knowing how much the Queen gave to other people, that she felt potentially attacked towards the end of her life.
yeah. Well, because, I mean, the Oprah interview was when she was still alive. And that was when she said the royal family was racist and a lot of other really damaging things. So, I mean, she would obviously, yes, I think it would have been um, really great to be able to write about her last 10 years because of all the challenges and the bravery and what she managed to do, despite what we now know was infirmity in her last couple of years. But I think I would look at Meghan as having cast a real shadow over her last few years. I've sometimes thought about an alternate scenario. What if they'd been really dutiful, um, committed to the royal family people? They had been happy in Frogmore Cottage. They were living in the most secure place, probably in the world, in Windsor Home Park.
Mhm.
And if she had been sensible, as Sophie Wessex, now Edinburgh, was, getting to know the Queen really well, listening to her wisdom, I mean, she would have become a better person. Meghan, I'm talking about, she would have been able to make a huge contribution to the monarchy, to Britain, to the world. Um, yeah, she wouldn't have had as much money, she wouldn't have had as much celebrity, but she could have lived as a really good person. And wow, what an opportunity to have just sat with the Queen and listened to her experiences and her views of all the people she had met. And I mean, it would have had to be some sort of novel to write the good outcome. But look, the Queen had many people who loved her. Edward and Sophie were absolutely invaluable to her in those last years, and she developed a much closer relationship with Charles and William and Kate. I think Catherine gave her a great deal of happiness. She had a solid relationship with her daughter Anne, and Andrew was the problem child. And I think he and Harry and Meghan were the three blights on her final years.
That's so disappointing, but I love the way you described the happiness that other members of her family brought her, because that does give
Yeah.
some comfort to imagine Prince Louis rolling up, and all that energy coming at her. So, according to a 2012 Time Magazine article titled The Wisdom of Queens, which I found, you give Catherine advice based on your Queen Elizabeth observations. And I want to
Yeah.
revisit some of these suggestions because they're brilliant, especially looking on, over a decade later. So, you give her these 5 lessons: resist the lure of celebrity, maintain a constant public image, master official duties, embrace country life, and support Prince William without overshadowing him. I don't have to tell you who I immediately think of with half of that list. Resist the lure of celebrity. Let's start with that. The Queen Mother encouraged Queen Elizabeth to consider herself the vehicle through which this love for country can be expressed. This, like, this this humbled her. She did not think of herself as famous. She
Oh,
considered herself this patriotic figure, which I love. That you and I love the UK, and I think one of the reasons we love the royal family is the patriotism you see through trooping the color, through the pomp and ceremony. Talk to me about resisting the lure of celebrity, because Princess Margaret, we saw do the rounds a couple of times, but Queen Elizabeth was so good about just being this vehicle.
yeah. Well, there's a wonderful story behind that quote, and that was when the 27-year-old, very new queen, was going around on this huge global tour with Philip, and they were in Australia. And literally three-quarters of the Australian population turned out to see them. And back in London, the Queen Mother was aware of what Prince Philip called that level of adulation. And so she wrote a letter to Prince Philip, or no, she wrote it to the Queen, sorry. And she said, how moving and humble making that one can be the vehicle through which the love of country can be expressed. Don't you feel that?
Ah,
And so it originated with the Queen Mother, and and the Queen really took it to heart. She she understood what she represented, and that yes, people admired her because she was pretty and she wore beautiful dresses and all that and bling, and but basically she was the means through which they could express their patriotism and their love of their country.
that is so beautiful. Can you tell me, and this is another story that reflects how humble Queen Elizabeth was while still maintaining that leadership, about Lady Mary Clayton's 90th birthday
Yeah,
party in
I'm so glad
2010?
you found that. Lady Mary Clayton was one of her Bowes-Lyon cousins, and she was incapacitated. She was in a wheelchair for most of her life, utterly uncomplaining, and very modest. Lived in a really modest place. The Queen visited her a lot,
Oh,
and on her because it was very close to Windsor Castle. And on Mary Clayton's 90th birthday, her family had a big party for her. And they brought in somebody who did a caricature of everybody who was there. And it was up on the wall. And I looked at it, and there in the middle was the birthday girl, Lady Mary Clayton, very large presence in the middle, and tucked in the last row was the Queen wearing glasses. I love that. And she was just very almost inconspicuous. And I thought that was a sort of symbolic little moment
yeah, you're
that
absolutely.
showed. I mean,
You write
because
the queen has
she would,
shown this, you write, the queen has shown this aspect of her character in subtle ways, arriving unannounced at the theater after the house lights have gone down, or blending into the background if someone else is being celebrated. I mean,
yeah,
by contrast, I hate to go back here again, but I know you've seen the headlines where people believe that whenever the royal family have something important to promote, up pops Harry and Meghan. You know, whether it's the king's important day in Canada. I don't even was Harry in Singapore? Did Harry do a
yes, Harry, when he wants to go someplace secretly, he's able to do it.
yeah,
Who knew he was in Singapore?
exactly. So you talk about how the queen was just she was the queen and still capable of being humble. I'm
Yeah.
so what a unique what a unique thing to be able to accomplish.
Yeah, and I think um William has that humility,
Mhm.
and I think Catherine really has it. I think she has the ability to know that she is a regal presence, but at the same time, not to capitalize on that. And she just has an internal restraint and a humility that you see it in every single engagement that she has. She doesn't want to be in the forefront, and particularly when she's with William, um, without being obsequious or anything like that. Um, she knows that he's numero uno. He's going to be the king. She'll be the queen. But unlike Diana, who at every moment tried to outshine Charles, yeah, Catherine is very careful not to do that. And that
Well,
was one of the things that I advised her not to do.
exactly. So support Prince William without overshadowing him. Queen Elizabeth was by definition the center of attention from the moment she became queen, you write. To create
Yeah,
a dignified persona at a young age, she was instructed to stifle her smile in public. Wait, but
yeah.
what else do you see? Queen Mary, who wore this is my favorite part. I have this highlighted. Queen Mary, who wore a tiara to dinner every night, even when she
Yeah.
was dining alone with her husband, and who,
Yes.
towards the end of her life, touchingly said she wished that just once she had climbed over a fence. What cute details about Queen
Yeah.
Mary that I'd never even heard.
Yeah, she definitely did. And she had very strict ideas about how she should carry out her duties and how her daughter should. And I think, and by the way, she had a very rigorous approach to education. And so I think she was responsible for some very important elements of the way Princess Elizabeth was educated. She made her memorize poetry all the time because she felt that that was a good way of disciplining her mind, and she did have a very disciplined mind.
Wow.
She had a very good memory, and I think a lot of that had to do with the way Queen Mary gave her instructions.
I want to mention this, but you say stay with your look. It shows confidence and reassurance to the public. To a remarkable degree, the Queen maintained consistency in her appearance. And I was telling you before we started, I cannot find the way we blow up poor Catherine when she changes her
Right.
hair color. Which we both disagree with, we thought that it was overblown and
Yeah.
ridiculous. But I can't find the photo where Queen Elizabeth goes from her dark brown hair to white hair. She just magically transitions, and it seems like no one acknowledges it.
No, and I don't think I ever found one. And believe me, I combed over thousands and thousands of photographs when I was doing these books. Um, but one thing that I did note is that she almost took the approach of someone in the military to her clothing. She sort of had uniforms for every specific occasion. She knew she had to wear beautiful jewelry, and she knew she had to have gorgeously designed dresses, but there was a real consistency, the to the way she, particularly in the latter sort of 20 years of her life, she wore basically the same uniform all the time in different colors. But I think that was for her a way of reassuring people, and also it was very practical.
Mm.
I remember when she was out riding at Windsor with her horse trainer Ian Balding, and she was, as she did all the time, she was wearing her Hermes scarf, and he said, "Why, you of all people, you're the queen, you're the monarch, you should set an example. Why don't you wear a hard hat?" And she said, "But you don't realize I have to go to an engagement after this, and my hair has to look good." So she wore her Hermes scarf.
That's hilarious. You also mentioned earlier that in Diana changing her look, okay, we talk about how she's a fashion icon today, but the reality was at the time that her constantly changing her appearance, which if you read between the lines, you see her going to her hairdresser saying, I want to look like Sharon Stone. I want Sharon Stone's
Right.
haircut and things like that. It actually projected some instability and insecurity.
Yes, definitely. I think that shows she was constantly, I mean, my subtitle of my book was Diana in Search of Herself.
Mm.
And she just never had the confidence um, to stick with a look and make it her signature, as it were. She
Yeah.
was, and I think it was that basic insecurity that she had to keep finding new things.
Well, I don't know if she'd believe what an icon she is today. We saw Catherine at a rugby match this last week, and she had on
Mm.
an outfit that was very similar to Diana's. I feel like I do think she does this on purpose sometimes, not to the extent that Meghan Markle does. Like my girlfriend joked, Maureen Callahan joked yesterday that are we going to see Meghan in the Christmas special, stuffing a turkey with all of Diana's jewelry on because she's constantly the show. We've got all these jewelry on. Are we going to see her stuffing the turkey? What are your predictions for a Queen Catherine? You gave those incredible instructions over a decade ago. Catherine has followed them almost to a T, and they were so wise. You knew so. I mean, you were so ahead of your time there. What do you predict for her as a future Queen consort? And do you think we'll call her Queen consort, or do you think we'll call her Queen
Oh
too?
no, we'll call her. I mean, the Queen Mother was never really called the Queen Consort.
Hmm.
She was the Queen.
Ah,
Camilla is called the Queen.
yeah.
When you become the Queen, you become the Queen. I mean, you are
Oh, I
technically.
have breaking news for us. Harry's at Clarence's house right now.
All right. It, it
So
happened.
it happened. So you heard it here a day late because this will air tomorrow, but we did get to it. He's at
Well,
Clarence.
and as they say, I'll bet dollars to donuts that Camilla's in the room.
Oh, yes. I mean, that's so we've done a show with Hugo before. Hugo told me previously that the Queen liked to have someone in the room for protection with her when Harry
Yes.
and or Meghan were there because she didn't know what they were going to ask for. She didn't know, they always needed something or were trying to get her to agree to something.
Yeah.
And so she wanted protection in the room. And I said, I think I said it recently, maybe to Jeremy Kyle. I said, well, that's why Queen Camilla's there because
Yeah.
King Charles wants somebody there to protect him.
Yeah.
The famous quote from a few years ago, I'm not a banker, I'm not an ATM, when the Queen says, why aren't you taking Prince Harry's calls? Did you see the recent report that he'd sent her a cell phone? Prince Harry?
Yeah.
Do you believe that? I don't know. I've
I,
only
you know,
seen it.
I it maybe, but I mean, I think it's sort of ridiculous.
Yeah.
But I think what he needs, what the king needs, is a witness,
Yes.
and Camilla's a witness who is very well versed in everything that has happened and has a very long memory about what Harry has said. And if Harry had a shred of common sense, he would take this opportunity to apologize. I know he said in that BBC interview, I have forgiven them. What has he forgiven them for? He was the one who attacked them
Yeah,
and
betrayal is the
betrayed and attacked them. I mean, if he could just put his pride in his pocket and say, I really apologize. I know I've hurt you. I've hurt the Queen. I've hurt William. I've hurt Catherine. And I hope you accept my apology. That would be the right thing to do. They deserve an apology.
oh my gosh, years
He's upended the monarchy for several years.
and all because he didn't get his way, all because he couldn't
Yeah.
have his way. It just was like the world's most intense hissy fit that I've ever seen. Well,
Yes.
we'll have to sit back and wait. I think the king and his team will be incredibly disappointed if we get any details out of this meeting because it proves that Harry can't be trusted. So hopefully, if Harry's in his right mind, we wouldn't get any details from this meeting.
Right.
But
But we know it's taking place, which, I suppose was inevitable. Unless they want to issue a statement,
oh, a
that's
joint
another,
statement?
yeah, I mean, that's another matter. They may. I mean,
Mm,
I doubt it, but that's one possibility. Otherwise, little bits and pieces could leak out.
well,
Um,
what did you think of that meeting when the employees were conveniently packed outside of that strategy session?
right. And those things don't happen by accident.
Amen. Amen to that. This is one of my favorite products. This holiday, while others are chasing the rush, find your sense of calm with Peak. Peak is a luxury wellness brand powered by rare plants and cutting edge ingredients, offering the perfect remedy for the season's hustle and bustle. Their science backed botanicals, minerals, and vitamins support metabolic function, immune health, sustained energy, and radiant skin. In this festive season, choose serenity as the ultimate luxury with Peak. One of their newest essentials, the Deep Hydration Protocol, is a day to night electrolyte system that keeps your body and skin hydrated while promoting better sleep. Enjoy a focus boost without jitters or crash. The natural balance of caffeine and calming compounds keep you centered and alert all day long. Nutrients in their matcha help curb sugar and hunger cravings, making it easier to stick to your wellness goals. Now, I have been using the deep hydration protocol every night for the past 2 months, and my skin has never looked so plump and dewy. I wake up looking and feeling like I got enough sleep. Ready to gift the glow? Unlock 20% off for life for yourself and everyone on your list. Give the gift of glowing health this holiday season. Get started at peaklife.com/Kinsey. That's PIQUE life.com/Kinsey. In my lifetime, I don't know if there's been a bigger story than this one. This week, I'm excited to welcome Sally Bedell-Smith, the best-selling author of Diana in Search of Herself and the voice behind Royals Extra on Substack. Together, we are dissecting Princess Diana's journey to find a better sense of self and her attempts to control her public image to boost her insecurities. We'll also be exploring what character traits she might share with her boys. Um, Sally, I love this book. You know what when I was looking for reviews on it because I was curious to see what people said right when it came out.
Yeah.
Were they eating it up? Were they critical? Because it was 2 years after her passing, I believe, when it
Yes.
came out. And one of my favorite reviews said, there will be a million more of these books about Diana. She's too interesting, but this is the only book you'll ever need to read. I thought that
Ah,
that was I mean, what a great testimony of how comprehensive and thoughtful this book is.
well, thank you so much, Kinsey. It was a high pressure process. My previous books had taken 5 years a piece to write, and that one took 18 months. So I had to see hundreds of people over there, and somehow I managed to pull it together. And I really wanted to give a balanced view of her, but at the same time explore the the subtitle sort of tells it all.
Mhm.
Portrait of a Troubled Princess. And her troubles went way back,
They
and they were exacerbated by her marrying into the royal family and then afterwards sort of cutting loose from the royal family. So I wanted to find out what animated her and what shadowed her for her whole life, really.
Absolutely. What I took away from this book was that Princess Diana is still remembered as a loving and attentive mother who was determined that her sons would never experience the absence of emotional warmth that you just kind of were hinting at. Um, that, you know, she just wanted to make sure her boys knew that they were loved. I feel like we get that sense based on the few things. I mean, Prince William is much more private than Prince Harry, but when you listen to the princes talk, do you feel that they felt like they were loved by their mother? Or are you overwhelmed with the sense of loss? Because there's a mixture of she was taken from me and she was the best mom, I should say, in the world.
Well, I think there were several levels. There's no doubt, and I talked to many people who said she was an affectionate mother and she tried to expose them to the world. She took them to homeless centers and she took them to visit a friend of hers who was dying of AIDS, although weirdly, she didn't tell them it was AIDS. She told them it was cancer, which I don't know why she did that. But so she definitely gave them love, but I think we can't ignore the fact that even though it was more private and less demonstrative publicly, that Charles gave them a lot of love
Mm-hmm.
as well. The problem was their marriage, which was so riven with strife, which they saw. There was a book that was actually banned in the UK, but many people who had read it said that it was truthful. And that was The Housekeeper's Diary by Wendy Berry, which you may or may not have read, but it did cite chapter and verse about the conflict that these poor little boys saw between their mother and father, and how Diana would frequently be in tears. And that was very difficult to process. And Diana, although she was, as I said, very loving to them, she could also engage in games of one-upsmanship and say to them, who loves you more than anybody else? And they would say, oh, Mummy does. um, Pamela Hicks, this sticks in my mind because she was a bit of a truth teller. She's still very much around in her 90s and a cousin through the Mountbattens. And she once told me, and I assume this was probably secondhand, but that Charles had been away. Diana was with the boys at Highgrove, and Charles arrived and he was sort of running toward the kids, and William stopped suddenly. And Charles said, darling, what's wrong? And he said, Mummy told me I wasn't supposed to kiss you. Um, which, how can you process that when you're a child? So there were probably a lot of moments like that, as well as a lot of moments of sincere and affectionate, sincere affection. But I want to go back if if I can, because I think the origin of so much of Diana's emotional instability came from her abandonment as a child. Her mother left when she was 6 years old. Nobody ever really gave her an explanation. Her father was in pieces, and because he was very much a man of his generation, he couldn't really share what was bothering him. And she was trying to take care of him and giving him tea and sort of following him around the house. But she had no idea what had happened. And she naturally thought it was her fault.
Yeah.
Her younger brother was only 3, so he couldn't process much of anything. Her 2 older sisters were in boarding school, and
And chasing after
she
her future husband.
One of them was a little later.
I know what you're saying, and I agree with you that these issues come from that abandonment. But the insecurity in your book, you write, in Diana's adult life, the circumstances of her birth, the girl who was supposed to be a boy,
Yeah.
assumed enormous significance in her mind as the first of a series of rejections that would splinter her self-esteem. I think that's so powerful, that insecurity starts so early, and I'm sure that did not help when her mother leaves, because now you're feeling an additional sense of rejection. And why?
Well, exactly. And then of course her brother was born. She was born in 1961 and he was born in 1964.
The
And so
heir, the sought after
he was
heir.
finally the heir.
Yeah.
And I mean, I know she said all that, but I'm not entirely sure that she was all that aware. John was born in 1960, and Diana came along a year later. I know her mother was really torn up by losing a child who was born and then died very soon after. That's a terribly traumatic experience. Um, but I do think as she got older, as Diana grew older, she looked back on that and said, well, yes, they didn't really want me because the boy who had been born a year before me had died, and I was a disappointment. But I think in her childhood, that probably wasn't a factor. I think it was something that she elaborated on as she grew older.
Mm, yeah, you do make that a note of that in the book, that perhaps there are some exaggerations.
Yes, there are quite a few. She's not always a reliable narrator. But I do think the abandonment theme is crucial. And she was, for the rest of her life, trying to fill that hole in her life that the abandonment created. Because it was not only that her mother left with another man, but her father, because of his psychological makeup, was not really emotionally available to her. So she, even though he was around, um, she couldn't get a lot from him. And I'm not blaming him for that, but it was just the way he was, the kind of way he was brought up.
Right.
But that was a real mark on her. And she had a real tenuous grasp of her identity. Um, she said, among other things, that she felt I was born in the wrong shell, that I felt as if I was looking at my family sort of through a glass, that I was not part of the family.
Mm.
These were things she said, obviously, when she was much older, but I think they were probably true. Um,
Can I ask you, did you read? I mean, I know the answer to this, but I should just say, when you read Spare, did
yeah,
you get the sense that Prince Harry's ghostwriter? Because so much of what you've said already, it's screaming Prince Harry to me. So the idea of Princess Diana feeling defeated because they wanted a boy. They
mm-hmm.
lost John, they wanted a boy. It reminds me of Prince Harry talking about how Prince Charles at the time was disappointed that he wasn't a girl. And Prince Harry's born and Charles runs off to the polo game. The idea of that abandonment reminds me of that insecurity because of abandonment, or that instability because of abandonment. That reminds me of Prince Harry, the loss of his mother, and how much he's fixated on that. So, is it truly a pattern, or does Prince Harry have a very skilled ghostwriter that probably combed through Diana interviews, combed through um, Andrew Morton's book, and found some similarities based on his interviews with Harry, and almost mirrored some of those stories in Spare? Or am I just like, are my detective lenses too tight today?
Maybe, because I mean, I do think that no, I think that there was a lot of revisionism in that book. And I'll read you one quote. I want to read it correctly,
Yeah.
from somebody who, and this was almost 5 years after this person had started working as an advisor to Harry and William. And he said, William and Harry, this was in 2013, right? 3 years before Harry met Meghan. William and Harry adore each other. They were two guys on a raft on their own after the shipwreck in their family, and they made it to shore. Their childhoods were difficult, which brought them together. And somebody else who had known them for the same amount of time said something quite different. I mean, it's different but similar, that they were thrust together through their common terrors. They also have a natural affinity. They are best friends because they are so different. Harry makes William laugh. William is very, very fond of him. They have a natural friendship. They share the same interests, although their characters are different, and they have the same values. This was in 2013. And the whole time I was reading Spare, I was thinking, what was all this simmering underneath Harry that people who were around them all the time didn't see?
Mm-hmm.
Was it real, or was it something that was um, convected in a way to make him more sympathetic? I tend to believe that they were, as brothers, very tightly bound together, and that things started to go awry when Meghan came on the scene.
Wow. I mean, and that would explain why Prince William seems to have whiplash about Harry's behavior and Harry's over the last 5 years. I mean,
Yeah,
it's you do hear that he says, I don't know him anymore, which is just devastating to hear those beautiful descriptions of these two troublemakers who figured it out. Um, yeah, that breaks my heart. What
yeah,
similarities do you see? I have this specific question because you're very kind in your book, when you talk about traits of borderline personality disorder. You're so
mm,
balanced in the way that you discuss this. I wondered if you feel at all watching Prince William, and I don't think we see it as much from Prince Harry today, but when you watch Prince William champion for mental health access
yeah,
and
yeah.
for the different mental health entities he works with, does it almost give that portion of your book credibility? It does feel as though they're recognizing these issues in their mother and they want to help other people because they've seen it firsthand.
Yeah. I mean, they've sort of walked up to what they witnessed, but they haven't gone, they really haven't dug deep into it. And I'll just say that borderline personality was something brought to me by somebody who knew Diana very well, who had talked to a few psychiatrists and psychologists and said, somebody I know has this range of symptoms, and they are frantic efforts to avoid real or imagined abandonment, a pattern of unstable and intense relationships, markedly and persistently unstable self image or sense of self, impulsive in at least two areas, including self mutilation, which he admitted to, and binge eating, which he admitted to, and recurrent suicidal, at least ideation, if not attempts. I mean, she did talk about having gone to Beachy Head, that cliff in England, and thought about suicide. And mood swings, very much a part of her personality, chronic feelings of emptiness, which she also had, um, inappropriate uh, ability to control her anger, and uh, moments of paranoia. She, in one moment or another, exhibited all those. Now, William and Harry have both, and Catherine, have committed themselves to mental health awareness. And I think that clearly is aligned to the experiences that they had. But I'm not sure that either of them is ready. Harry gave an interview, I think, after his second tour in Afghanistan, where he said mental health, he didn't say mental illness, but he said mental health touches everybody, whether you're in the royal family or you're in the army. And this is when he was expressing a commitment to help people in the army who were suffering from PTSD or other emotional problems.
Oh, that is interesting. He also worked with Oprah Winfrey on the Me You Can't See for Apple TV, which he had started that conversation before he stepped down as a working member of the British royal family.
Yeah.
But then the actual filming took place after. So I think it became, we heard more about Meghan and heard the trauma she experienced while being a working member of the royal family than I think they had initially anticipated when this conversation started, while they were still working members. You brought up Catherine, and I'm so grateful that you did that, because while you're talking about the instability of Princess Diana's upbringing, also we have to get into the fact that she's not this commoner that everybody says she is. I mean, she's playing hide and seek with Prince Andrew when they're children. She's around the royal family. She's on the estate, the same estate as the royal family, but there is an instability within her household. It's such a breath of fresh air to see the stability that Catherine's upbringing has bled into the royal family of today. I mean, I've never seen happier babies than her babies. They're well behaved, they're silly, they're sweet. Uh, do you think that's a testament to the Middleton family?
Absolutely. I think they provided William with the secure and stable family that he lacked. And he became very close to her father in particular. And they introduced him to really kind of middle class, conventional family life, which was totally alien to him. He was used to something very different. I think Harry sort of wanted the same thing. I think they both really wanted to have a home life that was very different from what they experienced. Um, I mean, there are a couple of ironies here that William and Catherine really began their married life at Anmer Hall, which is on the Sandringham estate, not far from Park House, where Diana grew up until her father inherited the title. And this is a house that was initially a happy house, but then became a very unhappy house when just her mother was a bolter. So there they are, sort of in the same neighborhood. And William and Catherine are bringing their children up in a very stable, loving atmosphere that was absent from Diana's life, several miles away. And Harry, too, wanted to have that. He was, as we know, he went out with quite a few women and it never really took. But he gave an interview, I think, I can't remember exactly when it was, but people were naturally asking him about his love life.
Yeah.
And he said, I really want to find somebody, but I have to make sure that that person, I'm paraphrasing him, I have to make sure that that person is the right person, and that will take time. Now, we know that it didn't take time with Meghan at all.
Yeah.
William and Catherine had 8 years together to figure out what it was going to be like for her in the royal family and to know each other. And I think that was one of the issues. I know that was one of the issues that came up between William and Harry when William had perhaps the temerity to say to Harry, why don't you tap the brakes? Why don't you see a little bit more? Because it wouldn't have taken much digging to find out how, not necessarily because her parents were divorced, that's all well and good, and many people are in that situation, but that there was so much acrimony in that family. And what turned out to be, ironically, Meghan's abandonment of her own father.
Mm.
Um, and and it's just, I think William had a point, but Harry was infuriated by what he considered his presumptuousness in telling him to slow down.
I've never thought about that, that Prince Harry likely has inherited similar abandonment issues to his mother.
Yes,
And he
yes,
has a wife that has shown time and time again that she has a match and she is ready to burn that bridge. Whether it's Thomas Markle, Jessica Mulroney, the cast of Suits, who says we no longer have a working phone number. I mean, does he live in constant fear when he has seen that there's little to no loyalty when it comes to his own wife? I mean, I'm sure he doesn't feel that way. He's obviously crazy about her, and I'm sure he
yes. I think,
justifies her actions.
yeah.
But I would be looking at some of these things going, I better not make her mad. I better do everything she wants me to do because I don't want to end up on the chopping block.
Well, I think it was certainly the case with Diana. Diana had was, because of all these insecurities, because she was afraid that people would abandon her, she was exceedingly demanding in her friendships, in all of her relationships. And if she thought somebody was critical of her or did something that rubbed her the wrong way, she would drop them. And I did, for Royals Extra, I had two conversations with Lucia Fletcher de Lima, who
Wow,
was
that's great. I love that.
who was an older woman who became probably her most important mother figure, because that was another theme of Diana's life, that she was always looking for a replacement for the mother who abandoned her. Lucia was a wonderful woman, and she was very sympathetic. She was wise. She was shrewd, but she had to yield to what all of Diana's other friends did, which was being on call, in effect, constantly. Diana had a need because she wanted affirmation. She wanted to be able to know that she could rely on people. So Lucia, when she was living in London, would be doing something and would get a call from Diana and would have to go break whatever she was going to do and go have lunch with her. She saw her a lot, as did her daughter Beatrice, who was also very wise about Diana. And then when they moved to Washington, when Lucia's husband was ambassador to the United States, Lucia had to adjust her schedule 5 hours behind Diana's, so she could be available for phone calls in the middle of the night or whatever. So she was a very demanding friend, and without judging her, I think it had a lot to do with her fear that people would leave her. So she decided she would leave them first.
Oh, yes. What I thought about when I read this in your book, Prince Harry, the reports that David Foster has become this substitute father for him in the
Yeah.
States, or even the fact that Harry is now surrounded by all of these older women constantly. There's the book agent that Meg Godmother's bookstore that Meghan and Harry went to the opening of, and they talked about how they were like family. Even Oprah Winfrey, in a sense, although I know other people think that I'm not sure what the status of the relationship is, but it is a little odd that Oprah Winfrey and some of these people have embraced Prince Harry and Meghan the way that they have. Do you get the sense at all that Prince Harry is looking for substitutes in the same way that his mother was, in these
I think
older mentor
I think that
figures?
I think that makes a lot of sense. Mother figures and father figures, although he has a father who would very much, if all I think all Harry needs to do is to apologize. And for him to have met his father after, in whatever it was 19 months, and then several days later say, my conscience is clear about everything that I said in Spare and everything I said in that Netflix series, both of which were so damaging, not only to their relationships, but to the royal family in general. It was an interesting shared characteristic that Diana had. She was, as I think it was Lucia Fletcher Lima or her daughter who said she found it very difficult to forgive and forget.
Oh.
And also, after the Panorama interview, she said to Lucia, well, I probably shouldn't have said that Charles wasn't fit to be king, but she didn't really, she stood by everything else she said. And I was reminded of Harry saying, my conscience is clear. Well, his conscience should not be clear.
Oh.
And the most obvious pathway to reconciliation is for him to really apologize, because that book and that series just sabotaged his relationship with everybody in the royal family.
Well, let's not forget the Oprah Winfrey interview. And I felt like
Yeah.
what made me so angry about the Guardian interview was that there should have been some sort of reconciliation earlier. In my opinion, apology, I should say, earlier. I am still bothered by the fact that when the King and Princess of Wales announced that they had cancer, Harry and Meghan kept a low profile. That's when I would have said, enough is enough. Time
Yeah.
is short. And
Yeah.
I don't want either one of us never to speak in a positive way with each other again. And the fact that 2024 was so horrible for Prince William and the Princess of Wales, but also you just talked about these two were best friends and experienced such trauma together. I'm sure you're looking for that person that's been with you throughout some of the most traumatic events of your life for support, and that person's just not there. That had to be pretty defeating.
I think it was, and I think I've thought a lot about their character differences. And one thing that I heard from people who knew them well is that William is much more sensitive than he appears. He keeps everything inside. Now, in all likelihood, he confides in his wife, who he adores, but that unlike Harry, who wears his heart on his sleeve, William tends to be more um, guarded in the way. That's just his personality. And there was another thing that one of Charles had a lot of gurus in his career. And there was one that I found fascinating, and I'll probably be writing about him. His name was Keith Critchlow. And he said, William is 100% fair minded. He has an impeccable sense of truth and correctness and justice. And that is character.
Mm.
And I think that is one reason why we haven't heard anything from him. He just doesn't want to go out there and start rebutting Harry. Um, Keith Critchlow didn't say the same thing about Harry. He just said, oh, he's kind of fun and jolly. And this is back when they were in their 20s. So, I think it must have been just devastating for William to hear Harry's truth, which in certain moments may have been accurate, but I think in many ways may have been sort of like a recovered memory that didn't jibe with what everybody else was witnessing at the time. And it certainly didn't jibe with what people who worked closely with them were telling me back in 2013.
I would have loved if instead of recollections may vary, the Queen was like, that does not jive with my recollection. I would have
Yeah,
really appreciated that that one.
yeah.
So we've talked a lot about Prince Harry's similarities to his mother, and they're not always positive. But correct me if I'm wrong, because I might be totally off on this. In your book, you write about how Diana was remarkably savvy at controlling her image through the media. I think that Prince William is too. I think he's just so good at it that we don't see blatant examples of it, like him getting out of Richard K's car. But I think that he's really great at the way that he is branded in the media.
I, I agree. And I don't know whether if it's something that he just fundamentally understands or something that Catherine fundamentally understands. But I agree. They every time they do something, it 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 resonates. And I think in the case of Harry and Meghan, it tends to grate. And and I think William does have that good sense. And I think it's really helped him. It's no accident that William and Catherine are the two most popular members of the royal family. And I think that has a lot to do with it.
You talk about how public Diana and private Diana, she struggled with that to coexist. Do you see that with Prince William or Prince Harry, or is it a different time where you don't have those as rigid expectations when it comes to the British royal family? And Prince Harry is just kind of thrown it out the window anyway.
Yeah. Well, I think William, yes, I think what we see is what we get. So many people compared him to his grandmother, the Queen, and in his sort of self-contained personality, and how really maybe he shows more of a sense of humor in private, but he's increasingly doing that now. And maybe he's just decided he's going to show a little leg and show people that he does have a good sense of humor because I've been hearing that for years. Um, so I think Harry, yeah, in his own way, I think we're seeing Harry both private, I think his private persona is probably pretty much what we've seen in the last 7 years and what we saw
Could you say
before.
the same for Meghan though? I think that there's an authenticity problem when it comes to Meghan.
Yes, I mean she's an actress. How
Yeah,
many how many roles is she capable of playing?
right.
And I think that's a problem for her because she strives for authenticity, but she does these things like her TV show that kind of make you think this is not authentic. This is inauthentic. And who is the real Meghan? I don't think we know, or we do know some of what she was capable of in private, and it's not pretty.
It's not as edifying as you would hope, knowing how welcoming the British royal family was indeed towards this woman who, I
Yeah.
mean, I'm horrified when I read books like yours and I remember Diana's uncle with a microphone or a recorder in front of his face confirming to reporters that she was a virgin. I mean, of course Harry is the spare, but the expectations were so much higher in Diana's, and through Diana's journey within the British royal family, and the fact that the royal family welcomed the Markle Sparkle, welcomed Meghan, gave her that beautiful wedding, the wedding that we found out. I probably quote your Lady Elizabeth Anson coverage daily today to this day, but the fact that we found out there were so many red flags behind the scenes, and yet they still gave her this day to be this princess and celebrated her. I mean, it's just very, it gets on my last nerves. It makes me very angry that she's
Yeah.
turned on them in the way that she has.
Well, not only did they give her the day, the Queen gave her really some fantastic patronages and positions in the Commonwealth, even though the Queen had misgivings about her and what her motivations were. She did her best to offer enticements. She saw a role for her, several roles for her in the Commonwealth, which the Queen considered one of her most important legacies. I think one of the worst things in that series that Harry and Meghan did was to trot out at least one expert, maybe two,
Yeah.
to say that the Commonwealth was sort of a sham and it was just a neo-colonial force, and that was a direct insult to the Queen and everything that she had tried to build over the years. So they've been very insensitive to the Queen, and
Yes.
they were before the wedding, and they were obviously to the 10th power afterwards with all the things that they said, um, making a mockery of the act of curtsying, which Meghan did on camera, and Harry looked a little bit abashed as she was
Mortified.
doing it, understandably. Um, but let's face it, Meghan came into the royal family, and I've heard enough to know that she really didn't have any intention of staying around for very long, and that she was already beginning to make deals um, before before they left, well before they left. But the
Absolutely.
Queen, to her credit, really tried. I mean, she gave her position with the National Theatre, and as I mentioned previously, those Commonwealth positions where the two of them could have really had a positive impact in Africa, the Caribbean, South Asia. There were many places where their presence would have been welcomed and would have redounded to the royal family and the Commonwealth.
Sometimes we think about Diana in the United States twirling around the ballroom with Phil Donahue. And she usually was at these events being gifted these awards for her philanthropy. Why is it so insulting for me to imagine Harry and Meghan accepting the Humanitarians of the Year award in New York on October 9th? What's the difference? What is the difference? Is it because we actually saw a life of service from Diana? I mean, she tried for 16 years. I think my timeline's right, but does it feel shallow when it comes to Harry and Meghan? Is that why I recoil when I report on these things?
I think you've just answered your question. Yes, it feels pretty flimsy. Diana obviously, moved from one charity to another. She dropped charities, but her intention was to make the world a better place. I really believe she wanted to do that. And her landmine campaign at the end of her life was very important and had an impact. And I interviewed Lord Deeds, who was with her on at least one of those trips, might have been to Angola. Um, and she was very sincere about it. She read about it, and she wanted to use her position. This was after the divorce, obviously, but she wanted to use her position in a positive way. Douglas Hurd, who is the foreign secretary, said she needed to be royal to succeed. And I think that was true in terms of the impact that she had. What was unfortunate was that as a member of the royal family and then sort of an ex member of the royal family, um, she was just thrust into the public spotlight, all the time in a way that frayed her nerves and uh, increased her sense of, absence of self-worth,
Mm.
and just made her life difficult. I don't think she wanted to be, part of her didn't want to be a celebrity, and part of her did.
Part of her likes
Um,
Kevin Costner calling. Kevin Costner on the phone.
yes,
That did impress
she
her.
she did like that.
One final question. We've talked so much about Prince Harry, and I'm sorry that he monopolized the conversation. He tends to do that. Do you see any other characteristics in Diana that she shares with Prince William? Because some will say Prince William's more like their father, but when I see him joking in that sense of humor you mentioned, that is Diana in a neon, neon sign above his head. That is Diana's baby.
Yes. I remember, I can't remember who it was who said to me that she did have a sense of duty, and that was something that she got from, not only from Diana, but also from, or that's what she got from Charles. And obviously, William has a profound sense of duty. And I think she, she imprinted that on him, and she knew what his destiny was. I mean, the great mischief that she made in the Panorama interview was to say that Charles couldn't handle being king, that it would suffocate him, that he would be unhappy, and that she wanted William to be king instead. And
Which,
she
by the
later
way, how
told,
cruel was that to do to that little boy? I mean, it's taken me years to actually come to that conclusion, but finally one day I heard that, and my mind was off the, oh my gosh, I can't believe she insulted her husband in that way, and my mind shifted to, oh my gosh, the pressure on that boy's
yeah,
shoulders, and it's been on his shoulders since the death of Queen Elizabeth, because until the death of Queen Elizabeth, people were still debating, should we just skip, and you'd see express polls, should we skip King or Prince Charles
yeah,
and go straight to Prince William? What a miserable responsibility and unfair responsibility. Responsibility is the wrong word, but what unfair expectations to put on a young man.
yeah. Well, let's face it, the whole Panorama interview was very damaging for those boys, even though she went to William and she said beforehand, "You'll be very proud of me." And he was devastated by it. And how could he not be, the things that she said, and including that, which did put a terrible burden on his shoulders, and undermined his father. So even though she was, I mean, we'll end on a positive note, she was a very loving mother, and she did have this impulse to take them outside of the royal bubble, and particularly William, who she took to Center Point, the homeless center in London. And I mean, I remember there was one year, I think it was 1993, during Royal Ascot. This was sort of typical Diana, during Royal Ascot, where Charles was there with his top hat and his morning dress, and she was taking William over to visit homeless people under a bridge on the south bank of the Thames. Um, Now, whether that was, with a theatrical intent, I don't know, but it was
Well, I think it's fair.
something
I think it's fair to ask that question.
but it was something that has resonated with him. It was a mission that she gave William, that he is carrying out to this day with his Homewards project, and his vow to eliminate homelessness. It's fairly ambitious, but to eliminate homelessness in Britain. So, those were the kinds of things that she did that were very positive. And there were others, but and also, she spoke toward the end of her life. She spoke fairly frankly, not only in Panorama, but in groups, about her own mental health issues. And I think that also encouraged William and Harry to take up that cause and destigmatize and urge people to get help. I mean, Harry, I'll give Prince Charles credit, even though the royal family was sort of oblivious to therapy or anything like that. But very early on, Charles took Diana to a psychologist in London named Dr. Alan McGlashan, and he really wanted her to get some help. And she was very mistrustful, sort of paranoid at the time. She went to him for eight sessions. Charles proceeded to have therapy with him for 14 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, so
And he
was
only,
it couples therapy or was it individual?
no, it
Oh,
was individual therapy, but he was very important. Nobody knew about it. Or only one or two people knew about it, but it showed that he was not in the least hostile to the idea that somebody should get therapy. Which, if we want to bring it around to Meghan again, her saying that nobody would let her have therapy when she was feeling depressed. And I just know that that is not the case, that she had plenty of therapy available to her, including people back in California. Um, so
well, when you talked about Princess Diana's father and that distance, but you kept saying it was a generational issue and it was also not wanting to burden your children. That's not something you would do, burden your children with your marital problems. I think the same could be said about King Charles. I mean, Harry talks about this distance or talks about this disconnect. And I think that King Charles is just from a different generation where he didn't like Prince William on the other side of the bathroom door, sliding tissues under the door because he can hear his mom sobbing.
yeah,
King Charles would never. King Charles internalizes that. Thankfully, he has Queen Camilla that he can lean on today, but he would have never said, "Come over here, boys. I want to talk to you about your mom's mental breakdown." That just was never going to happen. But that's just not the type of man he is.
no, but I think he obviously felt, he felt her anguish and his own anguish, and he confided to quite a few people
Right.
way before the world knew about it. Um, and and as I said, having been in therapy for 14 years, he certainly was aware that it was something that could be helpful. But I don't think he would cross that bridge and talk to his own boys about it, which, as you say, was probably generational. But I mean, if they were happening today, they would certainly be getting professional help.
Oh, that is so true. I'm glad that you brought that up. And I love that you brought up. Thank you so much for bringing up how passionate Prince William is about his homeless initiatives, because it's important that we mention all of that good work that he's doing. Again, my Diana Bible, Diana in Search of Herself,
Thank you, Kinsey.
Sally Bedell-Smith. If you have not subscribed to Royals Extra on Substack, you have to do it right now. Incredible exclusives from decades and decades of conversations you've had with insiders. And sometimes you revisit something and you think this is so relevant to today. And it's interesting to watch that, the cycle of some of these things that kind of pop up over the years. But I am such an admirer of yours. I can't believe you spent so much time with me. I'm sorry that I said final question 20 minutes ago. But
Oh,
that's
Kinsey,
how
we
good
could
you
go
are.
on for another hour
I, that's
or
how good
two.
you are. So
Well,
thank you
it's just
for
you
your time.
have such wonderful questions and you kind of, spark a great conversation.
Well, thank you. I can't wait to talk to you. Hopefully, you're not like, I'm never talking to her again. That was exhausting.
No
Hopefully, you're ready
way.
for round two because I am.
Absolutely.
I mean, we
Yeah.
didn't go through half my questions. That's how great this book is. I mean, it is incredible. The pictures inside too, I love. Would you ever write another Diana book, or do you think that this is done based on
Uh, I mean,
her?
I did it so quite a few years ago, but
Oh,
it's gratifying to think that it does hold up because when I embarked on it, literally 3 days after she died, I didn't think anyone would talk to me. And fortunately, a lot of people did. I mean, their emotions were very raw.
Mm.
I when I wrote about Lucy of Legerdolima, she said at first, she said, I know I'm so because she was so close to her. And she said, I don't know if I can do this, if I can talk about her, but she did. And many of them did, and they had great insights. And so that was exceedingly helpful because I was really, I mean, I'd met a bunch of people. I'd met Charles, I'd met Diana, but I just didn't have any idea of this sort of labyrinthine tale that her life turned out to be.
We are sitting down with celebrated royal biographer Sally Bedell-Smith, author of Diana in Search of Herself, to explore what is real, what is revision, and why the insistence on Diana parallels feels increasingly manipulative. Um, Sally, I feel like we have had this conversation before, but it's hard not to revisit it in some way after seeing the after seeing Diana's Vanity Fair shoot and Meghan's Harper Bazaar pictures. It just feels so blatant to the point of like copy and paste. I mean, did she have a vision board of Diana photos and she was just snapped away, like completely doing all of these things intentionally? It makes my skin crawl.
Well, we don't know what's in Meghan's head,
Yeah.
obviously, although she does tell us from time to time. But I did think that there were a number of images that were strikingly similar, particularly that one from the early 90s of Diana sitting on a floor, cross-legged, wearing a white shirt. And there was Meghan, as you say, cosplaying the same image. Um, I do think that from time to time she does try to echo Diana. But I think one of the things we need to think about is the authenticity factor.
Mm.
And Diana was authentic, not least because she was the daughter of the eighth Earl Spencer. Her family went back to the 17th century when they brought over King George the First to reestablish to establish the Hanover dynasty. And Diana, in some ways, always felt a little superior to the royal family. She used to say that, remember, you're a Spencer. And that gave her a certain confidence. But of course, as we all know, behind that confidence was a great deal of insecurity.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and she was authentic in other ways too. Obviously, she was very vulnerable. She had a troubled childhood. Her parents had had a bitter divorce. She longed for family security, and in some ways, she sort of transmitted those vulnerabilities that were, as we would say, authentic. Um, One of the things that I always was struck by her was that she was, as Lady Annabel Goldsmith, who I did some interviews with that I published on my Royals Extra Substack. She said she was a very vivid presence and that she really cared for people. And at the same time, being with people who needed her was therapeutic. That was all authentic. Um, I remember a Norwegian photographer, and I remember his words very well. He said that Diana's eyes were very wandering, excuse me, they were very wondering and modest, and that people trusted her. Her father said she had a sympathetic face. So, you combine all these things together, and it all radiated authenticity. Now, Meghan obviously it couldn't be more different from Diana, really 180 from Diana. She's American, she's biracial, she's an actress, she's a trained actress. She may not have been
She'd been married
a,
before?
she'd been married before. She was sort of a B actress, but she learned how to perform from a very early age. Diana was a performer too, but not in the kind of strategic way that Meghan is. And so a lot of what Meghan does feels inauthentic. It feels much more like a performance.
Mm, that's such a great point. When I was asked throughout the weekend about Meghan's tribute to Diana in the Harper's Bazaar piece, I said, and this kind of concerns me because as I'm listening to you talk, I'm like, oh, I said that I felt like, well, when someone lacks a clear sense of identity, they start to lean on imitation. And
Mm.
Meghan is such a polarizing figure that she must think cosplaying Diana will help her absorb some of the warmth people still feel for Princess Diana. You know, it looks like Meghan doesn't know who she is when I see a lot of these pieces, and even when I read the articles, there's no substance. I just hear her
Um,
regurgitating the same stories that Tom Bauer and Vanity Fair said we couldn't find any sources to prove that these were accurate. We can't prove. Hillary Clinton is not saying, yes, I received your letter, and I was concerned about
yeah.
the soap commercial too. But the reason why I'm concerned is because you literally wrote a book called Diana in Search of Herself.
Yeah.
So you're saying the difference is simply authenticity, that they both might have been struggling to find out who they
Yeah.
were, but it was Diana's authenticity that helped her find the love that she did from the public and find the acceptance and appreciation.
Yes, and I think Diana suffered from a great deal of inner turmoil that she was very good at masking when she was in public. And it really wasn't until the end of her life that she began to speak about it in a
Mm.
way that ended up being very damaging to herself and to her husband and to her sons because she was so candid and vivid about what she said. But I look at Meghan and she tries to persuade us that she is, in fact, empathetic and caring. And she does her charity turns. But I always feel that those efforts are overwhelmed by her self promotion. I mean, Diana did not really promote herself. People were drawn to her. She was so charismatic, um, and Meghan really doesn't have that, whatever it is, that magic secret power. Her superpower was her charisma. People were drawn to her. I don't think people are drawn to Meghan. And when she tries, to say, oh, I really care about this or that, we know that she is really fundamentally promoting herself. And that in turn makes us doubt what she's doing.
Wow. That is so true. We could end the interview right now. That was such a mic drop. I love that you said that.
Well,
So,
I think the other thing is she cannot disguise her hunger for money and status. And
mm,
we saw that most recently when she was so pleased with herself when she went to the party for Kris Jenner. It was only afterwards when it dawned on her and Harry that being in that setting at that moment on the eve of Remembrance Sunday, while the rest of the family were observing the war dead, that they realized what an error they had made and they tried to pull back the photographs on Instagram and then ended up looking even worse.
that is so true. Also, she, I think, would tell us that she doesn't try to hide that. And that's why she wants to be at Time 100 and Fortune's Most Powerful Women. She, and I mean, I think she's there before she actually deserves to be there. I think she's there because of the man that she married, not because of the launch of a lifestyle brand. But she's almost unapologetic about wanting money and wanting success. And
Yeah.
but I think we're like, but you haven't done this on your own, and you haven't you as ever was launched in February, and you're already at Fortune's Most Powerful Women event, and you have more failures on your resume than successes. I mean, did it surprise you at all that Harper's Bazaar lists Spotify as a career coup without acknowledging the fact that she lost that deal?
Yeah. Well, I think everything they listed, I mean, it's not definitive that she has lost her big Netflix deal, but she said, you know, series one and series 1A, really, which ran in August. And now she has this special, and all the signals are that this is the end. The hook for the Harper's Bazaar piece was Meghan has found her moment. Well, even I don't know if you read Elizabeth Holmes, but she has a Substack that is very, by and large, pro Meghan.
Yeah, that's why I don't
And
read it. But yes, I know who
well,
she
I
is.
read it, and she even was compelled to say, "Where's the moment?
Yeah,
Why are we invited to this party? Why
right.
is Harper's Bazaar putting her on the cover?
I
There's
think that the
nothing."
moment was Megan getting invited to Kris Jenner's birthday party. That was
Well,
literally the
that's a
moment.
pretty slender moment, but it was, as you know from having read it, it was a very fawning interview. But my favorite part was, I sort of felt sorry for the journalist who had to write it, but she did slip in that one subversive line about going for her second interview with Meghan in New York in a borrowed brownstone, arriving at the front door to be greeted by the pompously named house manager, who then announced Meghan, Duchess of Sussex. And as the writer pointed out, there were only two other people in that house, Meghan and me. And it just, this whole um, fixation she has on being called the Duchess of Sussex, when only a few years ago, when she was speaking to Oprah, she said, "Oh, all this grandeur doesn't mean anything to me. Titles don't mean anything. The only title that matters to me is mom."
Yes, yes. Well, and also,
So it just, it's, and somebody went out to her pop-up shop out in Montecito, and there was a case of wine or whatever, and on the front of it was I mean, you can't even make this up, was a sign saying, "Thoughtfully curated by Meghan, Duchess of Sussex." So you
but Sally,
continually.
how does that not violate the Sandringham Agreement? How, when she does this interview with Harper's Bazaar, which is again complete self-promotion, they do mention Archwell, but they don't tell us what Archwell accomplishes. And if you
Yeah.
look at Archwell's tax documents, it's certainly not a lot. But that entire interview was, like you said, complete self-promotion. How does that not violate the Sandringham Agreement that they would not use their titles to monetize? That they wouldn't use their connection to the British royal family to financially benefit?
Well, I think it does,
I
and
do
I think
too.
it should be scrutinized. Um, Very early, I found out from people who were working for the Sussexes that, and others have reported this as well. I think Tom Bauer, but that she was shocked that Harry didn't have as much money as she thought he did.
Hmm.
And she put her mind to figuring out a way to get back to the United States and figure out how to monetize the title and the money and and the title and their position, um, and make a whole lot more money than they were going to get in the UK.
And jam was the answer.
Jam was the answer, which she said in Harper's Bazaar was very brave.
Yes, I can. You cannot make this up. You cannot make this up. Diana's emotional transparency in your book seemed to come from lived experience rather than presentation, which we've kind of discussed with Meghan. From your perspective, does Meghan project a similar openness, or does it feel more curated? And I'd also give you this example. There are a lot of people in Los Angeles that are angry with the way she talks about how cinematic the Rodney King riots were. And again, this is a girl that grew up in middle class, upper middle class
Yeah.
LA, went to one of the most expensive schools thanks to her father, always throughout her youth growing up. She did not see looting in the streets in real
Yeah.
life. She might have seen it on the television. She did not see ash falling from the sky. And one person said, she takes these cultural moments and tries to make them about herself. She hijacks these moments and tries to make it her origin story when it's completely unrelated to her. And I do think that that's a difference between Meghan and Diana. Now, Meghan has told us plenty about her difficulties in mental health within the royal family. I would say it was too soon. Diana put up with it for 16 years before she starts to unravel. But how much of it is that Meghan's stories don't seem to be, anchored in truth? Like
I think
the
quite a
Rodney King.
lot. Yeah, as you mentioned, she didn't come from a deprived background at all. She went to one of the best. It was a Catholic high school. I have a friend who went there. It was very rigorous. Her father paid for it. Her father paid for Northwestern. He brought her onto the set of Married with Children, and she sort of got the acting bug when she was there. He helped her with her high school productions. He even got her a cameo role in the series. Uh, she did not have, even though her parents were divorced, she experienced nothing like the turmoil that Diana experienced from her parents' really very bitter divorce and not knowing what was going on and whether she was at fault. I mean, she was spinning around as a child, and Meghan had a certain measure of stability, even though her parents were in two different places. She talked most recently about traveling around with her mother. So I don't think it's valid for her to say, I don't know, I'm vulnerable because I grew up near where the Rodney King riots were happening. And, you know, um, Diana did struggle. And that's why I called my book Diana in Search of Herself. She was um, constantly trying to figure out where she fit in, who she was. We saw manifestations of that. Um, but it was, the thing is, it was genuine.
Mm.
And when Meghan talks about her vulnerability and whatever, it just doesn't ring true.
It does not. You studied how Diana connected with the public in a spontaneous way. You just used the word genuine, and I feel like it's appropriate here too. How would you compare that to Meghan's approach, which often feels planned and strategic? Like there are conveniently cameras there when she shows up at the Palisades fire and she's wrapping her arms around all of these people, and you know, they're dismissing volunteer workers for a moment so that Meghan and Harry can get a private tour. It does, Diana's love felt real. Diana's empathy and compassion felt real, even if there was a photographer conveniently there to capture her barehanded shaking hands with an AIDS patient.
Right.
You still felt that love from her.
Well, that that very specifically had a mission. I mean, she
Mhm.
wanted, because people were afraid to touch AIDS patients. And I spoke to the man who set it all up, and it was very carefully done, not for her,
Yeah.
but for the cause of AIDS awareness. Um, Very, very different from Meghan showing up at the fire, everything planned. She meets a girl, she gives her a bunch of merchandise signed by Billie Eilish. Fine. But then she goes on to say, oh, yeah, I was able to reach Billie Eilish through my friend, Adam Levine of, of Maroon 5. So what was supposed to be an act of compassion comes out as a sort of self-aggrandizing name drop that kind of negates the whole purpose of what she was doing. Um, and it's no surprise that right after that they were called disaster tourists.
Mm. Isn't that true? Well, I mean, to me, remember in November of 2024, Page Six received a lead from a source that 2025 was going to be the year of the Markle Sparkle. And then that happened. And I thought, is it? Is it? We're in 2025 and it's not getting off to a good start for Meghan. We've got the Palisade, her showing up, being called a disaster tourist over the Palisades fire. And then she tries to play off renaming as ever versus American Riviera Orchard as just this off the cuff decision that she's made based on instinct and ignores the fact that she had a nightmare when it came to attempting to
Mhm.
trademark that. So,
Yeah,
disaster tourists.
I mean, I mean, everything she does bland. From landing Harry as her husband, from coming up with a strategy for how to leave the royal family after less than 2 years, to having her interviews with Oprah and then on Netflix, with launching a business, relaunching a business, launching a podcast, relaunching a podcast, doing her with Love Meghan series. Uh, and yes, she has planned it all, but it just seems like one stumble after another. And I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think there's been no evidence that she really could lay claim to um, the name she often applies to herself, which is founder and entrepreneur, because with that, you have to have some success. We see lots of Instagram posts of gauzy images of people lighting as ever candles or sprinkling flowers on desserts. But we have not had any hard evidence that she is actually making money doing that. And all of her appearances, with the exception of the few charitable things that she does, but certainly all of her appearances on social media are aimed at one thing, and that is to promote her business.
Mm-hmm.
That's not something that anybody in the royal family ever does. They do everything in service of their charities. Charles has an enormously successful series of businesses selling products out of his house at Highgrove, out of Balmoral, out of Sandringham, out of the Castle of May in Scotland. These are lines of high quality products. And guess where all the profits go? To charity. Look, he has an enormous amount of money, so he doesn't need to go out and make it. But somehow the way Meghan does it just seems
Vulgar.
sort of vulgar, I guess. Yeah. And she keeps making the same mistake over and over again, even though she said to the Harper's Bazaar person who asked her about making mistakes, she said, well, you just don't do it again, in a sort
Yeah.
of airy way.
Yeah. You learn from your mistakes. It's interesting because you're right. She does plan everything, and I think she is the planner. But
Yeah.
I do think that she does not process the different consequences that might come from these decisions, because I just don't think that they consider consequences. To touch on the founder thing, I want to ask you a question. There was a report that I disagreed with over the last few weeks that Meghan had tried to get her products in big box stores like Target or maybe, I think Target was the specific store that was mentioned, or Neiman Marcus or Nordstrom or something like that. I don't think Meghan would ever want to pursue that at this stage, because if you do, then there are records of how many units were sold. And now you've
Yes.
opened up the access to hundreds of people in a company that might leak your actual sales records. And I
Mm,
don't think she would risk doing that. I think she likes control, contained, and the way she refused to give Bloomberg any numbers on how successful she truly
yeah.
was. Do you agree with that?
Yes, I do. And it's interesting because last March, I believe it was Ted Sarandos, the head of Netflix, when he was emphasizing, oh, yes, we're with Meghan and Harry, don't worry. And he talked about their Netflix house, which they had now have in two malls, the Galleria in Dallas and King of Prussia Mall outside of Pennsylvania, outside of Philadelphia, where I used to hang out when I was a teenager. And he said at the time, again, this was last March, that he expected that there would be some kind of pop up presence for As Ever. Well, they've just announced the opening of these two Netflix houses, and guess what's not there? As Ever. So I think that was probably part of their original deal because Netflix has been an investor in As Ever. Um, so it would have been logical for it to be there, but the only shows that are represented at that place, or both of those places, are successes
Yeah.
like Bridgerton
Mm-hmm.
and the Squid Games.
Yeah.
And there doesn't seem to be a place for that. So what Meghan has resorted to is going to her two friends, who own the Godmother's Bookshop near Meghan's house in Montecito, and have a sort of pop-up display there. And that's it.
Yeah.
And it's only because these two friends, one a literary agent, the other, Victoria
Who
Jackson.
Harry helped make very rich with Spare.
Yeah, she was part of the WME team that represented him. But I think the far more interesting person who is the co-owner of Godmothers is Victoria Jackson, and she made a fortune selling her cosmetic line, which is a sort of midline, just above drugstores, not Estee Lauder or L'Oreal, but she made a lot of money doing that. And then she shut it down. Now she started again. She did it on QVC, and it turns out that Meghan's friend Gloria Steinem, who she referred to in the Harper's Bazaar interview as Glow. I don't think I've ever heard anybody refer to Gloria Steinem as Glow, but Glow introduced her supposedly to Victoria Jackson. And she now, it turns out, lends Harry and Meghan her brownstone in New York where they can stay
And get
there.
announced by the house manager.
Oh yeah, that was the moment that we're never gonna forget.
No.
Um, her house in Beverly Hills, where they evidently stayed when they went to the Kris Jenner party. Even her house in Montecito, where the interviewer from New York Magazine did her interview several years ago, and Meghan had her 41st birthday party there.
Hmm.
She flies them around on her private jet, supposedly. So here we have this woman who is their sort of sugar mommy.
Yeah.
and who enables them to live at a level um, that they probably can't afford.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it just gives the grifter term so much more meaning. The
Yeah.
idea of
Well, it
Bill
reminds
Simmons.
me of this. This is exactly what the Duke and Duchess of Windsor would be doing if they were around today.
Oh my
They would be
gosh.
moving from one of Victoria Jackson's homes to another.
To your point about the author that stopped by the pop-up, I thought that Daily Mail article was interesting because she
Yeah.
also says that she asked the sales associate what the biggest seller was, what the most popular item was, and the woman goes, I don't know, maybe the jam. I mean, they couldn't tell you if it's flying off the shelves.
Yeah.
And then I also thought it was interesting that her observation was everyone was curious and poking around and smelling, but not a lot of people. But she said nobody made a purchase of Meghan Markle's
Yeah.
products while she
Yeah.
was there. So
Yeah.
I think that that's really interesting intel about what's going on at that pop up, conveniently located in a safe space where she knows that those two women will never release numbers as to
Never.
what's actually being sold and what's not being sold. I
I love how Meghan, well, she did this in her interview with Fortune magazine. And again, it's a sort of showy, um, showy evidence of her effort to make herself look like a really dynamic businesswoman. She was talking about, and I burst out laughing when I read it. She said, well, over and over, she talked about her learns. And, a normal person would say, what I learned from my experience or whatever, but she does that all the time. She flings jargon around like SKUs, which are a way,
Q1,
SKUs, or
Q4.
yeah. And and yeah, I mean, obviously she's had to learn all that, but does she have to flaunt it
Mm-hmm.
and make it seem as if she has this advanced and special knowledge of how to be a founder and an entrepreneur and a successful businesswoman? Well, we don't really know if she is or not.
Right. Yeah. I think that from an early age, fake it till you make it was her motto. I mean, I think we see that
Yeah.
in so much of what she does, even when she was a working member of the British royal family. Uh, because, yeah, in the Harper's Bazaar, it's Lily crawling in her lap while she's working. And sometimes they're on Zoom talking about creative things, and sometimes it's P's and L's, as in pluses or losses. But a normal person reading that is not going to know what a P or an L is. You know,
No.
she doesn't talk like a normal person, but she doesn't
No.
care. It's her objective is to convince us that she's something that she's not. And so
Yeah.
that's all that matters to her. I did I don't know if I've asked you this before, um, but it feels like something I should ask you. Do you think Meghan understands Diana's legacy, who Diana truly was? Or is she trying to script herself into a version of Diana that may not reflect the truth, that may not reflect who Diana was? And actually, we've seen her in different parts of her life in the last 5 years become different parts of Diana's life. The Panorama interview mirrors the Oprah interview. The Harper's Bazaar magazine mirrors the Vanity Fair. But I wonder if Meghan has any clue who Princess Diana was really.
I think she I think her view of Diana is purely the mythology. I don't believe she understands fundamentally what drove Diana, what her character was, what her personality was, what her experience was like living inside the royal family. I think she just operates completely on the surface and she emulates what she sees as opposed to what she understands.
Countdown to Meghan in a revenge dress. Okay, the like identical. I just feel like it's going to happen one day. Having written extensively about
But
Diana's,
what will be the circumstances of the revenge dress?
well, I have
that
my
we have
theories. I have
to.
my theories. Having written extensively about Diana's internal world, what do you make of Meghan's frequent narrative about being a victim of the institution? Does it align with the dynamics Diana really faced? Because you have said to me before, no matter how difficult it was for Diana, her ultimate goal was a King William reign. So she wanted to protect the institution long enough for her son to become king. And you don't see that with Harry and Meghan.
No, I mean, obviously, Diana had a great deal of trouble within the institution, not least because she made a sort of their marriage was a misalliance, and it caused a great deal of heartache on both sides. And I'm the first to say I'm not going to assign blame. And her emotional turmoil, her tendency to go beyond the boundaries, um, all of that made life difficult for her. I don't think she was, I mean, I think she was partially a victim, but I do think there were people within the royal family who did genuinely try to help her, including Charles,
Yes.
who in the autumn of 1981 took her to London, wanted her to see a psychotherapist. She rejected him, and then, ironically, Charles ended up seeing him, Dr. Alan McGlashan, for 14 years while their marriage was falling apart.
Oh.
He believed. I talked to therapists in the UK. He was not anybody who put his head in the sand. He understood about mental health and emotional problems. But, you know, Meghan was fundamentally mistrustful of people who were trying to help her. And that was part of her paranoia that got her in trouble,
Do
obviously,
you think
with,
Harry's partially to blame for that? Do you think Harry was like, I don't trust them? Harry was saying, oh, this person
well,
did me
yeah,
wrong.
I mean, I think there's a lot of Diana in Harry, um, particularly in that aspect. But getting back to, well, was Meghan a victim of the royal family? I do not buy that at all. I learned probably far too early that she was turning the royal family upside down. She was passive aggressive, she was manipulative, she upset a lot of people who were working for her. And that moment that she mentioned in the Oprah interview in March of 2021, when she said, nobody was there to help me when I was feeling suicidal and depressed. I know from people inside the inside the palace, as well as a psychotherapist, a very highly regarded psychotherapist. I called after she said that, and that person said to me, they tried to get her help.
Mm-hmm.
He said I just was dumbfounded when I heard that, and it was corroborated by somebody inside Buckingham Palace who said that that moment when she claimed she wasn't getting help, that is when she went to the HR department, made a complaint so she could get her version on the record.
Right.
Um, so I didn't see her as a victim at all. She was working hard behind the scenes to develop some deals. She wanted to get out of Dodge. She had not even been there 2 years. I mean, look, when Diana first came into the royal family, even though she had lived nearby and her father had been an equerry to the queen, she had some kind of vague sense of what the royal family was like. But when she went in at age 20, when she married Charles, she didn't really know what sort of discipline was required for the duties that were thrust upon her. at the beginning, she didn't really read her briefs. If she was going to sit next to somebody important at a dinner, she didn't brush up on who that was. But to her credit, over time, she really learned how to do it.
Yeah.
But it took time, and she was very, very effective.
Yes. And yes, that
But
is
Meghan
interesting.
didn't give it any time.
And imagine, I mean, I was sneaking into clubs, Sally Bedell-Smith at age 20. I wasn't worried about impressing a powerful leader that was sitting to my right at a state banquet. And so she did have a very, the future queen. Meghan wasn't even the future queen, and she did
No,
her responsibilities. What Lady Elizabeth Anson told you about, being dismissed and rejected from planning the wedding completely contradicts what Meghan Markle says, in the wider picture, in the bigger picture, to Oprah Winfrey about how the wedding wasn't her own, and so she had to secretly get married 3 days earlier, which we know is a lie. The archbishop had to come out and say that would be against the rules, and no, that didn't happen. If Meghan really wanted a wedding of her own, she had Lady Elizabeth Anson there who knew the ropes, who would have worked with her to give her the quiet, um, hi, George Clooney, the quiet wedding she claims that she was robbed of, because she says to Oprah, like, this was for other people. Well, if you truly wanted a partner, you had Lady Elizabeth Anson there who was so friendly with the Queen that she would have been your champion. She would have gone to the Queen and said, can we tone this down? We don't want to do this. We don't want to do that. The fact that Meghan says that to Oprah Winfrey is just completely insincere.
yes. I knew her very well, Lady Elizabeth Anson, and I did write about her in Royals Extra. And it created a bit of a stir that I didn't quite anticipate. But she spoke truth. And I was talking to her in the days, in the months before the wedding. And she was telling me that the Queen was apprehensive. And as these weren't the Queen's words, they were Lady Elizabeth's, but that they felt that Meghan had engineered this. I mean, that's pretty profound if
Mm.
that's in fact. But the Queen was, she could see things, she could see through people. She'd been around the track a few times, and so had Lady Elizabeth. She'd been planning parties for 50 years, most of them not for the royal family. She'd done weddings, she'd done parties, she'd done birthdays. Believe me, I knew her well enough, and I had seen her in action actually. And I knew how good she was and how really silly it was of Meghan to reject her. And I think, I think Lady Elizabeth was wounded by that. She went on to do, as she called her, Eugenie's wedding in the autumn. And at one point, she said to the Queen, "This will be your family wedding and the one that you can focus on." All that being said, despite the misgivings that the Queen felt and how cross she became with Harry when he tried to boss her around, that is, the Queen, nevertheless, she gave them those titles. And after they were married, she gave them really invaluable charities playing to their strengths. She gave Meghan the National Theater, for heaven's sake. She gave them both positions in various Commonwealth organizations where they could have been her ambassador around the world. I mean, when I think of the life that they left behind, that would have been so fulfilling, would have given them so much purpose. They would have had plenty of money from the income that Charles was providing. They had a perfectly wonderful house. Not only did they have the house, it was inside the ring of steel that surrounded the home park. which is probably one of the most beautiful private parks anywhere. They would have been secure, they would have had privacy, they would have had the opportunity for their children to get to know their cousins. But that presupposed that probably that Meghan had a personality transplant.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's the most insane thing. Wait, did you ever hear that Meghan actually she requested to live inside Windsor Castle?
I did not.
Oh, I
But
did. I think it
she's
was Katie Nichol that reported that, and I was like, I can see that. I can see the audacity of that, and that makes me even more hostile that she feels. Well, there were reports that she was jealous that Catherine and William lived in Kensington Palace. So I could see
right.
her wanting to live in a palace because they lived in a palace, not realizing how blessed she was to have that life at Frogmore. But wow. It is insane to think about what could
Yeah.
have been, especially during 2024 when they could have been such an asset to the family and really had their time to shine. But Meghan would rather be at Kris Jenner's 70th birthday party, and her face's 7-month birthday party, since she does have a new face.
Well, that brings up the whole role of celebrity. And I think, based on what so many people told me, Diana sort of felt trapped by her celebrity. It made her miserable, actually.
Wow.
Um, she, hated what was written about her in the tabloids because it was often untrue. And yet she felt compelled to fight back against it, which made her even more emotionally unstable. But it was not something that she welcomed. It was something that just happened because of who she was. Meghan, on the other hand, revels in her celebrity. I think a very revealing moment came when she walked into the Balenciaga show in Paris. I mean, I wouldn't even say walk. I would say she sort of sashayed and she walked with the stride of a model on a catwalk and beamed at the cameras. That is not something Diana would have done in that way. And when they went to the Kris Jenner party, I mean, she looked so pleased with herself. And she does, I believe, and others have said this, that she has a real craving for the limelight. For Diana, the limelight came with the territory, and she developed a very sort of tormented attitude toward it. But essentially, it was her trap.
That is fascinating. I have one more question for you, and then I'm going to find out what's coming up on Royals Extra because I don't know if we're allowed to share what you told me you were working on, but it's very cool. Before we transition to that, um, many people feel that Meghan leans heavily into Diana parallels to elevate her own image. Based on your knowledge of Diana's character, would the strategy align with Diana's values or would it contradict them? Would she hate the fact that Meghan uses her to elevate herself?
Oh, I think she would.
Yeah.
I think Diana, for all the confusion that she had about herself sometimes, and what Annabelle Goldsmith said to me, that she could be very self-destructive. She could listen to people who were going to serve her badly. Um, Meghan doesn't understand any of that fundamentally. Um, and so, yeah, I mean, she doesn't understand her legacy. She doesn't understand what Diana really meant. And I think what she does is she just looks at what she thinks is Diana's mythology and tries to appropriate it.
Oh my gosh, that's so true. Can we talk about what you've got coming up on Royals Extra? You have you're diving into the behind the scenes of the panorama interview, and
Yes, yeah,
you've got some exciting thoughts on that.
I do. I have to read the book. Yeah, I'm getting it tomorrow,
Oh,
but I have some interesting uh, I have some interesting information to share about what I knew in 1998 based on interviews I did. Obviously it was too late because Diana had died, but I find the whole episode of 25 years of covering up what um, how Martin Bashir deceived her and her brother Charles Spencer to be so appalling. And I really believe that the leaders of the BBC need to be called to account because, as Andy Webb points out, had and they knew in 1996 some, not all, of what how Martin Bashir had deceived her. And had Diana known then, I think her life
he
would
could
have
be
turned out,
alive.
yeah, probably. Yeah, because she would have known what he was and what he did to manipulate her. And there are things about that I know that I'm going to share.
Thanks so much for watching one of my favorite best of compilations here in 2025. Make sure you like, subscribe, and share this video with a friend. Again, happy holidays, happy new year, and I look forward to seeing you again very soon. Make sure you like, subscribe, and share this video with a friend.